Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for those who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of your life. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. Wow, I think you'll agree that this is going to be one of the most valuable interviews we've ever had here on Self-Made Man. Today, we're sitting down with internet law attorney Richard Chapo, and holy smokes, you guys are going to want to take some notes on this one. If you have a company that does business online, if your business has a web page, if you send emails or sell products, there's a 99% chance that you are currently breaking the law, and today you're going to find out what to do about it. We're going to dive into the insanity of the new GDPR rules that have come out of Europe over the last year and what you need to do about them. We're going to talk about those little important documents that you should have at the bottom of all of your web pages, like your terms of service and privacy policy, and specifically what you need to have in there when it comes to jurisdiction. Next, we're going to talk about some ridiculously cheap but very important insurance that you can buy that will cover all of your legal expenses if your business ever gets sued, and all kinds of other incredibly valuable pieces of advice. This is going to be one of the most valuable episodes you've ever heard, so please make sure that you share it with your fellow entrepreneurs so that they can protect themselves as well. Now, with that being said, I have an unbelievably important announcement for you about Self-Made Man that is going to be relevant, frankly, for the next 24 hours or so, depending upon when you hear this, so I hope you get it in time. This week, I posted a very personal and quite controversial video about the mission of Self-Made Man moving forward. If you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, just go to selfmademan.com and it's right there on the homepage. Now, in addition to that video, I've also shared some news about a big new upgrade that we're going to be rolling out to members in the coming week, which is the addition of a private Facebook group. This is something that you guys have been asking for a while, so I'm super excited that we're going to be able to launch that for you, which means that in addition to the 40-ish video classes that are now available to you on the platform and the new classes that we're posting each month, we're also going to hold 2 live video conference calls with myself and one of our instructors each month, which is going to allow you to ask us your questions live. Whatever you need help with, just say the word, and we're going to be there live on video to help you out. Now, this brings me to the urgent part of this announcement, which is the fact that we're going to raise the price for a Self-Made Man membership as of Friday night. That is tomorrow. So if you want to join, and if you want to get access to everything, all of the classes and the new private Facebook group, you can join right now for just $19. That's it. You get everything for just $19, but that discount will end forever as of tomorrow, Friday night, September 28th, so get a move on. If you're not a premium member yet, head to selfmademan.com, watch the video, and if you're one of us, if you resonate with our mission and where we're going, make sure that you upgrade to a premium membership for just $19 while you still can. With that being said, please help me welcome Richard Chapo. Richard Chapo, welcome to Self-Made Man. I am incredibly excited to have you on the show today because this is a topic that everyone listening needs to know about, and we haven't discussed it yet in the past 3 years. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it and do my best to keep the subject matter interesting and not too boring. Legal topics sometimes can get that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your credentials, and how you got involved in this specific area of law.
Sure. It's kind of a roundabout story. I think, most people tend to experience in life. I grew up in San Diego, California, within a mile of the beach. It was a horrible, horrible upbringing. After that, I went to college up at UC Irvine, up in it's kind of the south area of Los Angeles. And after that, I graduated from college with a degree in beer drinking and I think psychology or something of that sort. Tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life. Next thing you know, I ended up in Europe backpacking around for a summer or two and realized that I like travel quite a bit. And so under various threats from my family to disown me, I returned to the United States and went to law school. And I was going to, and did, try to get into international law. And it was an area that I thought was both fairly interesting, had the benefit of paying very well. And my really grand scheme was that I'd be able to travel all over the world. And so I did that for a little bit. And then unfortunately, this thing called the internet came along, which more or less terminated the need to travel. You could do everything online mostly. So I actually ended up doing wrongful death litigation defense work for about 10 years. That got really old really quick, basically defending hospitals and groups of that sort when they had patients who died. So that was a bit of an emotional ringer. So in 2000, I went on a hiatus and I went to Russia, of all places, and spent a year in Siberia. I came back from that, and I had a friend, an old peer, who had become CEO of an internet company, and this was in 2000. And if you think back to 2000, of course, most people were still on dial-up and what have you. The internet was very much in its infancy, and he was looking for legal work and couldn't find any lawyers. And one thing led to another, and I started doing it, and I've been doing it ever since. So that's kind of how I got here.
Awesome. Let's start from the beginning and take people through kind of online legal 101, if you will. If someone's got a brand new business, maybe they just, are going live tomorrow, what do they need to know from a legal perspective?
Well, certainly it's going to depend on the nature of the business, but, the general idea is to understand that the internet, is no longer the wild, wild west that it was at one point. Go back, 18 years when I first started. There were really no laws at all that applied to the web. And what you tend to see in situations of that sort is it takes a while for the law to catch up. Various governments will pass laws. And then you also have the courts decide cases that will affect how those laws apply online and whether they're just equitable issues that apply. What we're seeing right now is that the law is kind of swinging back towards the point where we've gone from the wild, wild west to where we quite frankly have too much regulation. We have a lot of different rules. Depending on your business, really, the most important thing you want to do is sit down with an internet lawyer in your area. There's quite a few of them now. I'm in San Diego, but they're all over the place. And get a free consult. Basically show them, what you're doing from a business perspective, just to make sure, that there aren't any obvious problems. There are going to be gray areas. The internet is beautiful in that sense, in that, almost anybody could start a business, and most of the ideas that people have are pretty creative. And sometimes you're just going to have to live with that, and that's fine. But those are the steps you want to take. Now, then, from an actual functional, standard, if you have, enough capital, you're going to want to form a business entity. An LLC is usually optimal, but talk to an accountant in your state, because states control the rules for business entities within their jurisdictions. So in California, for instance, everybody says do an LLC, but there are actually fees and taxes that California has that can sometimes make an LLC unattractive, whereas an S corp might be a better option. So make sure you sit down with the CPA, tell them what you're doing again, and then they can give you kind of the best advice. CPA fees, lawyer fees are all tax deductible, so there's some relief from that sense. But form that, and then look at insurance. Again, this is just kind of a basic business to-do list. With insurance, you really want to protect yourself from liability. A lot of people don't think about insurance online. I'm kind of baffled as to why. Because even if you form an LLC or an S corp, if you get sued, you're going to have to pay an attorney to defend you. So you're looking at, $50,000 if it's intellectual property, such as copyright, maybe $100,000. If it's a trademark dispute, maybe $1 million. How are you going to pay for that?
Well, let's talk about that, because that's a topic that does not come up very often at all, and that I think very few people know about. So when you say insurance, what do you mean? What kind of insurance?
Well, you're going to get a liability policy. There are companies, there's a group called Hiscox, HISCOX.com, that write these policies now or will place them. And what these policies do, a lot of people don't understand what insurance does. Insurance serves really two purposes, not just one. So most people think, well, if I get sued, my insurance company will, pay the penalty or the judgment against me, or, whatever the settlement amount is. And that's true. However, insurance policies also tend to have defense provision. And what that means basically is they will pay for your legal fees. And that is incredibly important, because in some cases, legal fees can end up being far more than any actual judgment, particularly in copyright cases. And you need money to pay the lawyer to do that. Sometimes the insurance company will have what's called a defense panel, which they've already pre-approved lawyers. And so you just go to those people. That may not sound like the greatest idea at first, but actually it's often good, because those lawyers tend to just work in that area. So they know it inside and out. Law really is kind of a specialty field. You want to make sure you stick with somebody who knows that specific area. But your insurance is going to give you those two things. It's going to pay for your legal defense fees. And then if you have to settle or judgment's rendered against you, it's going to pay for that. So it's a key thing to have. It's very important.
Is the pricing fairly standard, just based on, the size of your policy that you want to take out?
Well, No, but the pricing isn't terrible.
Well, that was the question I was going to get to, which is what would be ballpark for this kind of policy?
For $1 million in coverage, unless there's something really unique about your business, you're probably looking at, a couple $100 a month. So maybe $2,000 a year, something like that.
So completely justifiable, and it'd be dumb not to have it.
Yeah, because, literally, people say, well, form an LLC. I always hear attorneys say this. I always want to slap them upside the head. They say, form an LLC, form a corporation, and you're protected. And that's great and all. Your personal assets are protected. That's very true. But the problem is, for most people who own a business, the vast majority of their value and their wealth is in that business. And so if, if you started Uber and you have this idea and your intellectual property and everything's in the business and, you got sued the first year out and you lost the business, well, yeah, you still have your house and your car and everything, but you lost the business. You lost that idea. You lost all that intellectual property. So, yeah, you definitely want to add insurance onto it. Incredibly important. Now, sometimes insurance is difficult to get for specific risks, regulations. We have the European privacy law, which we can talk about in a while. But, that's a regulation. It's government regulation. Sometimes insurance won't cover those things. So you need to work with an attorney again, make sure the attorney reviews the policy before you buy it. Because the devil's in the detail. These insurance policies are, they're small phone books. And the first 3 or 4 pages say, well, this is what we cover. And then the remaining 97 pages say, except we don't cover this.
Right.
And you need to know and understand, what's not covered, because I had one came last week. I have a client who's a specialty blogger and an influencer, and the policy that they were trying to sell her covered IT work. Well, she doesn't do IT work. So the policy was completely useless. And so you run into those kinds of situations. So definitely, make sure you do that. Or if you have a friend or anybody that's in the insurance industry, have them read through it and go through it. They're not too bad, but you want to make sure you have the appropriate coverage.
I've heard from someone in the past that you need to consider how big of a policy you take out, because in one way, the bigger your policy is, the bigger of a target you are, right? If you're being sued, those attorneys see a giant pot of gold that they can go after and, potentially get. Let's just say you've got $1 million policy versus a $100,000 policy, right? What are your thoughts and feedback on that?
It's a legitimate point. I tend to, on the internet side, I tend to go with the, larger policies, just because somebody looking at your website or your app or whatever it may be, they're not going to really be able to tell what type of insurance you have. What they're really looking at is, what's your viability now on the web and what's your viability in the future? We have what are called intellectual property trolls out there. There are people that will go out and they'll buy up these old patents or trademarks or whatever, and with never really the intent of using them, but instead they go around to other people who have similar types of intellectual property and they threaten to sue them.
Right.
And they're doing this and they don't know if they have insurance or not. And it's just something that they do. So, the problem for most people is that when you're an entrepreneur, you're in the business, to create and grow a business. Legal fees and legal issues are the last thing you want to deal with. So if you have an insurance policy that has substantial coverage, $1 million, to be honest, is often quite sufficient. It's just a basic policy. If you do get sued or you get a nasty letter from Getty Images or something like that, you can sleep fine knowing that, worst comes to worst, you have, insurance to pay for it. If you don't have an policy or you have a very small policy, well, it's a different issue. The other thing comes down to is really, what are the assets of the business? What are the assets of the business and what are your personal assets? What do you have at risk? And so, you can do asset protection and things of that sort once you become more successful. But, it just kind of depends on the specific situation. So Facebook, for instance, Mark Zuckerberg's really not concerned. They have massive resources and, lawsuits against them. I mean, I think the recent GDPR lawsuits, came out to, I think, $8 billion people in Europe are suing Facebook and Google for. But they have so much money that doesn't really matter. So it's all scale.
Right.
But generally, at least $1 million is probably a good idea.
Okay. Awesome advice. Step number 2 in this process, I'm going to assume, is it the standard legal docs that are typically found in the footer of every web page? Can you dive into those?
Sure. Yes. The much reviled legal docs. So basically what we're looking at a minimum, are terms and conditions and a privacy policy. Terms and conditions are much misunderstood. Terms and conditions are a contract with your users. Now, a contract, if you think about a contract in the real world, when you sign one, you have to sign it for it's binding on you. Same thing applies online. A lot of people don't understand this, including some very large companies. Your terms and conditions only are binding on users, people who visit your website, people who purchase from your website, and things of that sort, if you can show some kind of affirmative action in which they've agreed to those terms and conditions. That's why on some sites, smart sites, you'll see a little box when you try to check out or you join a membership or whatever it is that says, yes, I agree to the terms and conditions. That's what they're doing. And they're forcing you to do that. Now, why is that important? The terms and conditions, because they're a contract, you can create clauses in there that will slant any legal dispute in your favor. We'll create a bias, or in some cases, we'll just get rid of them. Let me give you an example. And this is something Google uses recently. Every terms and conditions should have a simple clause. It's called the choice of forum clause. And what that means is essentially the clause states, if there is a legal dispute between us, that legal dispute has to be heard in this location. So Google's in California. They put it, they designate California as a destination. They were sued in New York, and they challenged in the New York court saying, hey, we have this choice of forum clause. And they're enforced about 75 to 80% of times. There's equity issues and all kinds of different things. But the New York court enforced it and said, yes, you're right, and dismissed the lawsuit and said to the plaintiffs, well, you have to go to California to sue Google. Now, would they do that? Yes, because Google's got big pockets and probably is going to make sense. But for most people listening to this, if you have a smaller e-commerce website or something of that sort, is somebody going to come from Florida to sue you, wherever you may be located? Often they're not, because the price of the transaction of the product they purchase from you, whatever it is, it doesn't make sense on a return on investment basis. If they spent $50 buying something from you, they're sure not going to spend $5,000, traveling to wherever you are to pursue a lawsuit. The other provision that's in there that's very important from the internet perspective is there was a case in 2011 with the Supreme Court. Politics is, of course, something we always want to stay away from in these conversations, but the Supreme Court has been undergoing a change. And they moved from what's called a liberal majority to a conservative majority. And so the justices tend to be more pro-business now than they were maybe 10 years ago. So in 2011, there was a case called AT&T Mobility versus Concepcion. And what that case said was that businesses can force consumers to agree to go to arbitration instead of trials. And they can force consumers to waive their right to pursue class action lawsuits. So class action lawsuits, when you get a certain number, say 5,000 or more people that all have the same claim. So I make a food product and everybody gets sick from it. Well, they all have the same claim that there's something wrong with the food. So instead of everybody filing an individual lawsuit against me, they do it as one big lawsuit. And law firms love this because they can get a lot more money out of it, and it really gives them motivation to pursue that. So under this case, they said, well, you can block that. You can force people to waive that. And with an internet website or with an app, you do that in your terms and conditions. And so what will happen is, let's say Zappos, for instance, in 2012, I think it was, Zappos was hacked and a bunch of their customers' information was taken and they were sued. And they didn't have that clause in their terms and conditions. It wasn't a huge surprise that the case had only been around for a year. But if they had had that case, instead of class action lawsuits being filed against them, each individual customer would have had to file a separate arbitration claim against them. Each one would have to go individually. Well, let's say there's 10,000 customers. How many of them do you think would have gone through that process?
Sure.
Very few. So it's this kind of technical, frankly, it's the stuff that people hate lawyers for.
Right.
But it's this kind of technical approaches. If you're my client and you have an e-commerce website, I think a lot of people don't understand the lawyer's role under the law isn't to be fair. It's to protect the client. And so in your terms and conditions, you're going to have clauses that cover these various things. And then, of course, the other side, if there's a lawsuit, it's going to try and fight those clauses. And that's where we get into court and everybody goes at it. But you're trying to set up the field with these clauses in such a way that you're going to be able to protect the business as much as possible. And it can be very effective, particularly, with sites that aren't huge. If you're not doing, hundreds of millions of dollars or $20 million or something of that sort, you can go a long way to really limiting, the chances of being sued or certainly being sued successfully.
Now, I want to circle back real quick to the beginning of this topic on the terms and conditions. And you talked about the fact that the end user has to take an affirmative action, usually by checking a box that says, I agree to the following terms and conditions, right?
Correct. What
if the checkbox is not there? Because I would say 90+% of the websites that I've ever bought products from do not have that. Correct.
Yes. It's baffling. It is really baffling. The courts have been pretty clear on it. The difference when they stick. So let's go back 2000. When I got started in the field, at that time, judges were all, your average judge is somewhere between 50 and 70 years old. In 2000, they have no idea how to use the internet. They can't, do anything with it. They can't set up their own email, nothing. Now let's fast forward, to 2018. It's 18 years later. The younger judges that have come online, they grew up with the internet, and everybody understands when you look at a website or an app, when was the last time anybody scrolled to the bottom of the website and clicked the terms and conditions link?
Sure.
Never happens. And so then an argument was made to the judges that, hey, this is ludicrous. Consumers are getting, held to these standards for a document that we all know nobody's going to read. And then that approach is called a browser app agreement. And so courts have started to agree. And they're saying, yes, no, you're absolutely right. We want to see some kind of affirmative action. And you see big companies going down on this. Zappos, Petco had problems. There's an endless number of these sites. And I don't know why they don't take the step. They certainly have the resources to do it. And in fact, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I don't want to hire a programmer or something, there are free open source JavaScripts floating around and other code. I think there are WordPress plugins that do it now. So we're not talking about some major technological hurdle that you have to take. And why people don't do it, I have no idea. My clients all do it.
I can tell you. I can tell you why.
Okay.
So it's interesting. Like, I just went to facebook.com in an incognito window, right? So it sees me as a brand new user. Mm-hmm. And they have right there before you fill out your name and your email address, above the button, by clicking sign up, you agree to terms, data policy, and our cookie policy, etc. And then the sign up button below that, right?
Right.
So they don't have the checkbox on there. And then the reason why I am hesitant to do the checkbox thing is because I know it's going to kill my conversion rates.
Right.
So it might take my ad spend or my cost to acquire a customer, from $50 to $100. And now I'm making half the money. Maybe my business is making $50,000 a month instead of $100,000 a month by adding that stupid little checkbox. So what do I do, right? As a business owner, that could mean the difference between keeping my employees and not.
Sure. No, I think, abandonment rates are certainly a concern. Yeah. They're always a concern. And you can see Facebook's approach. What they're going to argue is, well, we said if you, click the button that you're essentially doing the equivalent of affirmative action, that you're agreeing to that. Now, for a smaller site, I could understand doing that. There's just a certain amount of risk. There's always going to be risk with these things. And as long as the client's comfortable with it, and you say, well, look, there's a good chance, they might not enforce this. Then you move forward. But for a company like Facebook, they're idiots. Right. They're blazing idiots for not requiring the check the box, because Facebook's such a monster. I mean, you're not going to join because you have to check the box with Facebook.
Right.
And even more so, and once we start talking about privacy, all the new privacy laws that are coming out require you to have this now.
Well, let's use that as a great transition to dive into document number 2, which is needed, and that is your privacy policy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't have these documents on your website, you're breaking the law.
Terms and conditions, no. Privacy policy, yes. But breaking the law sounds pretty harsh, and it's not. It's not deadly. You're looking at fines. It's not a criminal complaint, but it would be fines and things of that sort. So privacy policy, we have to step back, and if I start rambling, just interrupt me. But privacy is kind of a bizarre area. Privacy law is a divider between jurisdictions in the world. And what I mean by that is, in the United States, you look at the U.S. Constitution, federal Constitution, there is no privacy right that's written into the Constitution. Now, courts have interpreted that it exists, and then we get into controversial subjects like abortion that we don't want to get into. But the point is that privacy in the U.S., from a civil side, from a business tracking you side, is kind of a joke. The idea that we have privacy in this country is pretty laughable. And, you see states sometimes try and step in and pass privacy laws, which we can discuss, and that's, all that. But in other parts of the world, privacy is considered a fundamental right, human right, like we view free speech. So, for instance, you see a place like Europe, the European Union, as part of their founding document, privacy is specifically in there, and it's considered very important, and so on and so forth. And so the problem that you run into on the privacy side with privacy policies for websites is you're starting to see the world divide up into what's called the splinter net, where there are different jurisdictions and different areas that have different views of privacy, and then, of course, different regulations and laws regarding them. So satisfying the privacy laws in the United States is pretty simple. A privacy policy for just a U.S. target audience is a pretty straightforward document. In the EU, so let's say you have a site and you're selling, soccer jerseys or something like that, and you get a lot of sales from the EU, you're dealing with a whole different monster that is, incredibly bureaucratic, incredibly burdensome, red tape. You've got to get checkboxes and on and on and on. So privacy policy is the first step that you have to understand is you have to focus on where's your market. If your market is just the U.S., then you're probably going to be in fairly good shape, and you're going to have to go through. And again, federal law is extremely weak, but states have passed requirements. California, number one amongst them probably. And what's required is basically transparency. So you're going to talk about, it's a legal document, but it's not a contract where you're trying to put everything in your favor. All you want to do is be transparent. Here's the information we collect. Here's how we store it. Here's how we use it. Here's how we share it. And in the United States, you're not going to get in trouble for any of those things as long as you disclose them and as long as they're accurate. One of the problems we see and get calls on literally every month now, somebody goes out and quote unquote borrows a privacy policy from another site, and then they get a notice from the FTC or from a lawyer saying, hey, you say you're doing this, but you're not. And it's because they have a provision in this privacy policy that they borrowed, they've never even read, that says that they're not sending emails, or they won't send emails, or this, that, and the other. And in fact, they're doing it. So you're violating your own policy, and you're going to be liable on that. Second thing with the U.S. privacy policy is very, very, very important. You need to think about the end game with your website. Your website or your app, what are you going to do at the end? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to pass it on to your kids? A lot of people don't think about this. The exit is very important because one of the biggest values of your online business in the U.S. under the U.S. business models is your client list and your email list. Okay. People can mail on that. It's drip marketing, whatever, the value of that is. But for most websites these days, a website design is mostly modular, unless you're doing something really unique from a business method standard, there's probably not going to be a patent. Yeah. You might have a trademark, some copyrighted materials, but it's really your client list and your email list that has that value. Well, you see people, and it just kills me all the time in their privacy policies, they put, we will not sell, share, or rent your personal information. Really? How are you going to sell the business?
Right. Yeah, I heard of this years ago. So when we had our privacy policy done, we made it as broad and as open-ended as we possibly could.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we're going to actually share your info or sell it or rent it or anything, but it's as open and in our favor as possible so that we can be good stewards of our customers' information. And we're super strict and conservative about that. We don't share it with anyone. But for the reason you just mentioned, it's very broad and open, which will allow us to actually sell the business or transfer assets to another company at that time.
Right. And people need to understand that from a legal perspective, this is a slam dunk situation. This isn't some controversial legal topic. If you promise somebody that you're going to do something and then you violate that promise, you've breached your own agreement, and courts will block you. The standard case, and the reason you probably heard about it, was True.com. True.com was a dating site, and their parent company had all kinds of problems. The parent company went into bankruptcy, and of course, all the subsidiary assets got dragged into bankruptcy, including True.com. Plenty of Fish, another dating site, saw an opportunity to grow their member base. They came in, they offered, I think it was $800,000 or $700,000 for the membership database of True.com, which is basically the entire value of that site. And True.com said, yeah, let's do it. And a Texas Attorney General objected, saying, hey, you had promised in the privacy policy not to sell, share, or rent, the personal information of members. And the court upheld that objection. And True.com's value went from $800,000 to
zero.
Yeah, literally. I think it ultimately sold for something like $13,000.
Wow.
And so, so people need to think about these things. And I understand. I fully understand legal documents are boring, particularly when it comes to a website. I have Apple products, and they want you to update every 3 hours. You have to agree to a new document. I'm a lawyer, and I don't read the documents. I get it. I understand. But getting it set up right, at least the first time, is going to save you all kinds of problems. in the long run. So that's very important. But yeah, so the privacy in the U.S., not a big problem. Privacy, if you're selling to the EU,
before we dive into that. That was a clarifying point I wanted to get to when you said if the U.S. is your target customer base, it's your target market. How do you define that? Because I understand if I'm placing ads in Europe, then I need to abide by that jurisdiction's policies. But if I've just got people from all over the world who are organically coming to my website on their own accord, do I have to still do the same thing, or I just need to stick to the U.S. law?
Welcome to World War III. There's currently it's a $24 million question, to be honest.
Let's start with GDPR then, because I have a feeling that's obviously this is going to be covered under that, and we'll just hit all of it in one umbrella.
Okay. So cut in, because this is an incredibly complex area. Whenever you feel like people would be getting bored.
You bet.
The GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation. It went into effect May 25th, 2018 in Europe. Now remember, Europe, privacy is a very important human right. It's right there front and center. Previously, the only privacy law that Europe had for the internet was a regulation that was enacted in 1995. Now, think about the internet in 1995, and you can imagine, how laughable the regulation was and how outdated it was. One of the loopholes in that regulation that all American attorneys used was that the regulation basically said that it only applied to companies that had a physical presence in the EU. And so everybody in the U.S., of course, would say, well, we're in the U.S., we don't have that physical presence, we don't have to comply, even if our entire product line was being sold to people in the EU. So the big change that occurred tons of big changes, but one of the big ones was Article 3 of the new GDPR. And what that says, it's called the territorial scope provision. And it goes right to the question you just asked, which is, how do we determine if the GDPR applies to a company that's not in the EU? And the answer is a three-pronged test. The first test is, do you have stable relations with companies in the EU that tailor to the EU market? Nobody really knows what that means, but a lot of people are thinking, host and payment providers. If Google has hired, a server farm in Germany, and they're serving traffic to Europe, then, that's probably going to qualify. The second provision is the one that really gets people confused. And it basically says that if a company envisages that it's selling products or goods to people located in the EU, even if for free, then they must comply with the GDPR. Now, this is something that's interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, and this is a big misconception, the GDPR does not apply to EU citizens. It applies to people located in the EU. So if a German citizen comes to Los Angeles or comes to San Diego, where I am, and does something here in San Diego, these companies that they're dealing with in San Diego, the hotel and everything, they don't have to comply with the GDPR. But as soon as that citizen flies back to Germany, then any company that's contacting them does. That's how ludicrous this all gets. So that's one provision. The second thing is, what's offering goods or services? The GDPR is really poorly drafted. They don't really define it. They don't really say what that is. Instead, there's a recital. There's a second document that's basically, they're called recitals. Recitals are essentially the people who are drafting the regulation are trying to explain what they meant and how things should be interpreted. And what they talk about there is looking at the website and looking at whether there are indicators on the website that suggest that it's targeting the EU. So, for instance, are there international phone numbers that people from the EU can call? Can people in the EU order in their own currency? Is there a European version of the website? All these different factors. So a lot of people are saying, what's this, what's that? There's another regulation that's been out for a while called the Brussels regulation. And the courts in Europe have interpreted that, has a very similar provision, and they interpret that, and they basically created a list of factors, like the ones we just talked about, and what they're trying to say is, well, come on, is this site really focused on the EU or not? And so, you just have to kind of wing it. You have to do a risk analysis, to be quite honest, looking at those, the overall site, what's its value, what is it focusing on, is it using European language? If the site is, dive bars in San Diego, California, you're probably in good shape,
So from a practical standpoint, since this has come into reality a few months ago, as a web surfer, what it means for me is that I get this little notice that says, our website uses cookies, et cetera, and then I just have to X out of it. And it's just this annoying little pop-up that I have to deal with every time I go to some new site. So from a user experience, that is the difference that it makes to me. As a business owner, it means that am I going to put up one of these pop-up banners that essentially announces my privacy policy's terms? And that I want to essentially annoy my audience with that and reduce my conversion rates? Is that essentially what we're talking about? I mean, from a practical standpoint, right?
No, it's far worse than that.
Okay. So what?
No, it's you are a business. You are evil. That's the basic.
That's what you're disclosing.
That's the mentality.
Got it.
So let me give you an example of the mentality we're dealing with in Europe. Facebook, whatever you may think of Facebook. Facebook's a good platform for keeping in touch with family. I got family all over the U.S. And so somebody's, kids have a birthday, they're 9 years old, they post photos of the birthday and, all the family, hits like and pretends we care. Okay. In France, we just broke the law. We can go to jail for up to a year or be fined 5,000 francs, whatever it is, because we violated the privacy rights of the children.
Yeah, crazy. It's just a spaghetti mess of bureaucracy that's full of landmines. And if somebody wants to get you, they've got a reason to get you, right?
Yes. The top 20 businesses, online businesses in the world, none are in Europe.
Yeah.
Top 50, maybe one.
The one big question that I have right now, because, we, again, 80-90% of our business is in the United States. We're based in the United States. If people around the world want to find us and join us, that's great. So I've delayed having to deal with this for a while just to, when this thing launched, like the month up to it, it was this giant scare tactic campaign in the news where it's like, if you don't have your GDPR set up, the world's going to end and your company's going to implode. And I was just like, this is super annoying.
If you collect one email from somebody in Europe, you're going to get hit with a $20 million fine.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I've been watching from the sidelines, trying to figure out, okay, is this really something that we need to do or not? And my one big question that I haven't had answered yet is, if I were to sell my business in 3 years, and we have not had that, pop up in place essentially to be compliant, we're not compliant with GDPR. Is that going to be something that could blow up the acquisition of my business by the company who's buying us?
Yes.
Okay. So, and is it a matter of fixing it? Let's just say, okay, well, now we'll put up the pop-up and we'll send out a notice to all of our users with our updated privacy policy. Does that fix it and remedy it at that point? Or does the acquiring company still have liabilities for the previous 3 years of violations we've had?
Well, let me back up instead of just saying yes. It depends on what that company's purchasing you for. Are they purchasing you for your email list and your client list? If that's the case, then yes, that's a problem. You can scrub those parties from that list, though. You can scrub the EU. I'm sure you've heard there are newspapers in the U.S. that just completely block the EU.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, most of the big newspapers in the U.S. just block the EU now. Dick's Sporting Goods blocks the EU.
Wow.
I've told my clients.
Talk about making the world a smaller place.
Oh, they're idiots. They're complete idiots.
Yeah.
I have clients who've moved from Europe to here, and the reason they move is just doing business there is impossible. So now, so those are the issues. So you're saying, well, can we repair? You can't repair it. Because when you go to send out that email with your new privacy policy, you just violated the GDPR. You don't have consent to send them an email.
So
let's talk about something real quick here. The splinter net. So this concept is called the splinter net. I didn't create it. It's out there. People should go read about it. This is very important. If you want to make a lot of money in business, it's important not to understand. Well, it's important to understand where things are today, but it's much more important to understand where things are going to be in 5 or 10 years. Okay. The splinter net. This is something that we can all read about and learn about. The internet is being divided up. And is being divided up on of all the strange issues. Privacy is one of those issues. The EU is not only just done with the GDPR, they're enacting new regulations on email. Today they announced they're going after search engines. search engine transparency, all these different things. And so what you're seeing is for the smaller guy, you're going to need to make some risk analysis, return on investment decisions. If you get $2,000 of sales from Europe in the year, why would you spend 20 grand complying with the GDPR?
Right.
And that's where we're headed. And you're already seeing it, and you're seeing governments are getting, they're more proprietary now. They're getting more aggressive. Russia is saying, hey, if you collect information from our citizens, you have to maintain servers in our country with that information. And you can play the ominous music behind that. And Google and Yahoo, of course, do it. And LinkedIn said no. And now you can't view LinkedIn in Russia. I don't think you can view Skype in China. There are all these different things, and that's where we're headed. Now, the beauty of it is most people listening to this are probably in North America, and we have the biggest, strongest consumer market in the world. So there's that benefit. But yeah, if you're thinking about Europe, how are we going to address Europe? You need to start thinking strategically instead of reactive. Be proactive and think, well, okay, we have a significant number of sales in Europe. How do we address that in the future? Because Europe's going to become the banjo player in Deliverance. They're going to wall themselves off, and you're seeing it already start. And they're going to be isolated. So, do you want to start a company in Europe? Because if you do, then there's strategic decisions. So, you could go to for instance, the UK. The UK, even though they have Brexit, they're still going to comply with the GDPR and consider all that binding. Well, Ireland and the UK, they're business friendly. In the UK, they had something like 70,000 complaints last year, related to privacy, and they only issued fines in like 77 cases.
So a question for you as a business owner. I assume that I can provide the required privacy notice that GDPR, needs or wants on an IP basis, right? So I don't have to show it to people or IP addresses that are popping up within the United States. But if an IP logs in from Europe, then I can display it and I can provide them what they need without having to annoy the 90% of my visitors that are inside the US.
Sure. So cookie software, there's a company called CookieBot online. And you can just show the cookie notice to the EU. People with an EU IP address, and then with your privacy policy, you're going to have to figure out how to do that. But yeah, now there's some people that will use VPNs, virtual private networks to get through that. And you want to include language in your terms and conditions and your privacy policy saying, hey, dear jerk, if you use a VPN to access my website, you're violating these terms and conditions. Nobody really knows how that's going to turn out. Now, the one thing I will say, because I can hear you starting to sigh quite a bit, is there are 28 enforcement agencies in the EU. Each country has their own. Most of them are woefully underfunded. And I think that, what you're really going to see a lot is obvious cases, big companies, that are going to be good examples. Those are really going to be what the enforcement actions are.
Yeah, and that's why, I think the only real practical way that this could affect someone like myself or whoever's listening to this is when it comes to that point of acquisition, right? If the attorneys of that company who are looking to buy us are going through their due diligence and they see, hey, what about GDPR and your compliance here? Oh, we haven't done it. Well, man, you guys are a hot potato now and we're not going to be able to move forward, right?
All right. But even at that point, you can convert the site to something like ConvertKit. ConvertKit, I know that they can go in and, track the IP addresses off the email addresses that you have. And so then you can scrub the list. And say,
okay, so I can just remove any European, essentially, members or prospects from our...
the attorneys doing the due diligence are not going to be happy. But the person who's in charge in management who wants to buy the company, they want to buy it for some reason. And so you can say to them, or, as your attorney, I would say to them, yeah, there's the legal argument. But if all these people were just scrubbed and they're never going to be emailed again, who's going to complain?
Right. Gotcha.
Now, their attorneys are not going to like that. And their attorneys are going to say, we're not going to sign off on this. But, if somebody wants to buy your site and they're motivated enough, you may have to drop the price. That it just opens up leverage points, but it can still be done.
Okay. All right. What else do we need to know that we haven't covered yet?
So the GDPR, what we've discussed of it is perhaps 1% of the GDPR. There are record keeping requirements, your email list. Anytime somebody comes to your website, you have to have consent from any of your tracking, even if it's third-party tracking. As the website owner, you are responsible for all your plugins, payment processor, everybody. You have to get consent. That's what CookieBot does. It'll do that for cookies, but then you also have to have a separate pop-up if you're collecting your information for like an email list.
So just stop doing business in Europe is essentially what you're saying.
It's literally what I've told most of my clients.
It's insane.
And most of them said, I can't do that. And I say, okay. And then every week I send them a new notice about some stupid GDPR ruling. And, slowly most of them are working to the way, that way. So let me give you an example how stupid it is. Facebook, you can open up your little fan group on Facebook.
Yeah.
So a German court ruled that you are liable with Facebook. Jointly liable with Facebook is what's called a joint controller. Because if you don't get consent from people who join your Facebook group, because you can see information on them that can be considered personal data. And that can be anything from an IP to their location to anything that directly or quote unquote indirectly allows you to identify a person. Now, if I call up Facebook and say, hey, I want to make changes to our fan group so we don't track this information or something of that sort, how long do you think I'm going to wait before I get a reply from Facebook?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet I'm jointly liable with Facebook.
If you go the route and you're just like, hey, all right, we'll just stop serving customers in Europe, is the way to do that just to block European IP addresses? I mean, what's the practical?
It is, a better approach, and I'm surprised more people don't take it, is simply to, when they come to your site, have them bounce to a mirror page, either a one-page site or, your basic site that has nothing on it, no plugins, nothing of that sort, just basic information, and then tell them right there, hey, these are our social media channels. If you're in Europe, go to these channels and you can get all the information that we're doing, that we're producing, whatever it is, and they can access that information through there. So at least they'll still be following you if you're an influencer or something of that sort. If you're selling an actual product or service, you're going to lose that business. Now, if there's sufficient business that's a painful thing, well, then, it's time to sit down and call an attorney in the UK and say, hey, we're an American company. We want to try to set up a separate UK, entity, probably in Ireland, to do this, and get guidance on how to do that with a minimum of fuss. But be warned, the GDPR it makes no distinction between Google and somebody running a tomato, growing blog. Mm-hmm. Record keeping, you have to do record keeping, you have to do all these different things. You're supposed to, under GDPR, you're supposed to designate somebody in Europe who will take liability for you. And you're supposed to guarantee their financial status and that they can pay any fines. And, I can give you my Latin answer to that, which is 2 hands up, knuckles, one facing one way, the other one's rowing, and a certain finger is going up in the air.
Right.
It's ludicrous. Again, the mentality is you're a business person and you're evil and you're up to no good. And we don't care what the burden is. And the new email law hasn't even come out yet. The email regulation comes out in fall or maybe January, and that should pretty much kill off email marketing in Europe.
Wow. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I had no idea it was as bad as it was.
A lot of people, they look at the surface and you see these things, $49 kit, get compliance with the GDPR. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, right? It does create an entirely new opportunity for law firms and I don't know what the proper term would be over in Europe who could fulfill all of these legal requirements, right? For a US based company. It's like, poof, a month later, there's a new industry that people need to hire in order to continue to do business there.
No, absolutely. And you would think, it would be a golden age for lawyers. And most lawyers I talk to, I'm a one-man operation. Guys I talk to in bigger firms, we all know each other. Pretty much everybody hates us because it was written in such vague terms that, it's so difficult to give clients guidance on certain things. So I'll give you an example. You're supposed to get consent from people when they come to a website before you collect any personal information on them. So like CookieBot, the pop-ups you see, or you'll see a consent box, pop up if you're going to join an email list or something of that sort. One of the enforcement agencies, the ICO in the UK, came out and said, well, consent isn't permanent. And we all said, okay, what does that mean? And she said the answer was basically that consent degrades over time. So at some point in the future, even though you have consent from somebody to be on your email list, you need to go get it again.
Right.
And so we say, okay, how long? And the answer was an appropriate amount of time. Well, excuse my French, but what the fuck does that mean?
Right.
I mean, how am I supposed to tell clients? So I mean, it's, you get to that point and it's, break out the gin and tonics and, let's all have a giggle. So, and that's pretty standard through the GDPR, through all 99 articles.
I think, as you mentioned a couple of times, this is all risk assessment.
Well, what we are going to see, and I will warn users is, ransomware out there, where people say they've frozen your computer and pay them $400 and they'll give you the key to release it. We're going to see GDPR blackmail. People calling you up, hey, you're not liable for you're not in compliance with the GDPR, fines up to $24 million or 4% of your worldwide gross, and I'm going to report you to, XX enforcement agency unless you pay me, $500 or whatever. That's coming. And it's going to come in waves. And
this is another reason why you want to go get business insurance and make sure that your insurance policy covers this. I assume.
Insurance does not cover the GDPR.
No. Oh, man.
Yeah, they don't. Insurance companies don't like covering government regulations because government has obviously a deep pocket and these things will go on for years.
Right. That's true. They have endless resources.
Right. And the second thing is insurance is like Google. It's all an algorithm. And they've all worked out, actuarial tables and everything else. Well, the GDPR is brand new. So nobody knows what's going to happen or what's going to, how it's going to work. Are the fines going to be small? Or are they going to be huge? Nobody knows. And the enforcement agencies, they have different reputations. If you're doing business in the EU, you really want to, you have to select which country basically, you want to be the group that you're going to work with. You want to select Ireland, which I'm pretty sure most of the enforcement agency just is located in a pub somewhere. Or you want to choose the UK because the UK will send you letters. And we've even seen this with big companies like Facebook. They send warning letters.
I see.
And it goes back and forth. And they've stated our goal isn't to, find the crap out of everybody. It's to get people to comply. And so historically, they've been pretty, reasonable. You might not like what they want you to do, but they're not going to fine you. French and the Germans, you may just want to block those countries anyways. They are completely out of control. And they, Germany sent out 175 GDPR audit notices before the law was even enacted.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's, they're just out of control. So, yeah. So insurance it's a problem. The best I've been able to get so far is insurance that will not cover the fine, but it will cover the defense cost. So hopefully here pretty soon they'll get a better feel what's going to happen and they'll start providing some coverage for it. Groups like Lloyd's who write, custom policies, may do that. But yeah, no, it's unfortunately there's not a lot of good news on that front at the moment.
Well, Richard, this has been a fascinating episode, and obviously this is a really important topic, and I'm really glad that we finally got a chance to cover all of this for everybody. If someone wants to hire you to do an audit, maybe of their existing terms and privacy policy, if they are missing those and they just need to have them created from scratch, or to talk about GDPR more, what's the best way that people can reach out to you and connect with you on?
Sure. You can reach me at my website. It's SoCal, like Southern California, SoCalInternetLawyer.com. A bit long, but I purchased it at the time when keywords, exact match keywords, could get you rankings. So you can get me there. You can also get me on LinkedIn, the social media platforms. That's what I'm usually on. And my last name is Richard. It's Richard Chapo, Chapo. So you can always find me. If you do a search for Chapo, there was a drug lord in Mexico named El Chapo. I'm not related to him unless I'm in a bar there and trying to get free drinks. But contact me any of those ways. I'm licensed in California. So if you're in another state, you should look for an internet lawyer in your area. Just go to Yelp, do a search, and you'll be able to see what people have to say about their lawyers. And then if you're international, I can help you there.
I want to ask you about that real quick because, I have a great general business attorney, but they don't specialize in internet stuff. So they don't know anything about GDPR.
Right.
Or for the most part, privacy policy things. And they're more accustomed to doing, business transactions, buying and selling businesses and everything that it has to do with that. So there's not very many, I don't think, attorneys who specialize in the internet world that I'm aware of. You're only the second that I've ever met. Is the jurisdiction thing super important, or can you help us at least review our documents, even though we're in Texas and you're in California, or do I need to find somebody that is located in Texas?
Well, as I'm speaking into the mic, yeah, unfortunately it is. The law is very antiquated in this area. We're licensed by state, not by, the federal jurisdiction, unfortunately. And so the cost of going through each state and getting licensed is just ugly. In Texas, there's an attorney named Mike Young. I don't know him personally, but he's a well-known internet lawyer. So if you're looking for somebody in Texas, he can certainly help you. And these days, because so much is bleeding over into the internet, a lot of lawyers, particularly business lawyers, have kind of been forced to learn the niche. But I would definitely use somebody who is an internet lawyer, that they put themselves as that, not somebody who's a business lawyer who, plays around on the internet. And again, usually if you do a search on Google, a couple people will pop up and look at their websites, and you see them. They should be talking about things like the DMCA, obviously privacy policies and GDPR. Any of these kinds of things, internet-oriented things, you should be able to tell pretty quickly from their website if they, know what they're doing or not. And then just run them through Yelp, and that'll give you an idea if there's anybody in your area who's competent or not.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again for the time today. This was a fascinating call, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise and bringing everybody up to speed on an incredibly important topic today.
It was my pleasure. If I could just say one thing.
You bet.
Podcasts on the law tend to be very scary, even with the GDPR. These are to-do items for you. I try to tell people all these things can be overcome. It's not the end of the world. Don't forgo your internet business or your idea because of these things. They're just things that have to be dealt with. Get with a lawyer in your area. Most of them are going to meet you for free. And what they'll do is they'll go through, look at and listen to your business idea, or look at whatever you have, and then they'll just create a list of things that you need. And you can just work your way through that just like you do with other to-do lists. So, the point of this is hopefully to let you know that these issues are out there, but not to scare you, not to get you to, forgo the idea and, screw it, I'm going to go be a bartender, although noble profession. But, so please don't take it that way if you're listening. The U.S. has an incredibly strong entrepreneurial market, and, the web is really leveled the playing field between big companies and small people, people that are just starting out. Don't let any of this deter you from taking advantage of that.
No, and I'm going to say that everyone who's listened to this here today probably knows more now about internet law than 99% of other small business owners in this country.
Right.
So you're already ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Well, they're large multi-million-dollar companies who have made a voluntary decision not to comply with the GDPR.
Yeah, no, we're going to probably, want to do something similar. I just don't want to have to deal with that, right? So right. If we had 80% of our business there, that'd be great, but, we don't. So lots to think about, lots to consider, and thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on everything.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, guys, gals, if you know a business owner who needs to know about this, please share this episode with them. I can't think of many that we've, had here over the last couple of years that are as important as this topic. And everybody, if you own a business, needs to know about this. So please share it with them. And if you can, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That would be absolutely amazing. Thank you all so much for listening, as always, and we'll see you next week.